Okay, so welcome to another cover seminar, the last one for the year. And for this one, we are joined by Matt York, who has written a rather interesting book called Love and Revolution. Crap, I forget the subtitle. Is it For Politics of the Deep Commons?
A politics for the deep commons, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, cool. So we're going to hear from Matt and then have a chat around his work. So with that very non-flashy intro, I'm going to hand it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to share my screen, which worked perfectly just now. There we are. You can all see that, right? Okay. And can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Stephen, for inviting me today. It's a real honor. It's a real honor to be here. So I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the themes that are developed in the book that you kindly invited me along to push. In particular, what we ended up calling revolutionary love. And then, given that this is a cover seminar, I'll introduce what I've been calling the deep commons. So I'm going to speak for under half an hour, I think, and it'll be a bit of a whirlwind tour of the material, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end then if there's anything you want to dig a little deeper into. So here we go. Okay, so although it's generally been overlooked by conventional political histories, it's possible to trace a distinct lineage of revolutionary love that has acted to animate radical social transformation. So from the anarchists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries and their Marxist revolutionary cousins, the anti-colonial revolutionaries of the 20th century to the civil rights activists of the 1960s, there have been countless examples of political actors revolutionizing love in their pursuit of freedom. And then as we discover in the book, this lineage can be seen to continue influencing the political struggles of contemporary anti-capitalist, ecological, feminist and anti-racist activists globally in their challenges to an increasingly authoritarian global capitalism and in their attempts against seemingly impossible odds to avert the ecological disaster that we're currently careering towards. One important figure in this lineage, who I'm a big fan of, who spoke frequently and very eloquently about love, and a great place to start, was the anarchist revolutionary Emma Goldman. So she envisaged revolutionary love as the creative, inspiring, elevating basis for a new race and a new world. At the core of Goldman's anarchist politics was an unwavering belief that if the world was ever to give birth to a society free from class, gender, or race-based forms of systemic inequality, having moved beyond domination and oppression, that love will be the parent. This love is the revolutionary force she holds above all others in her pursuit of a free society. In her words, love is the strongest and deepest element in all life, the harbinger of hope, of joy, of ecstasy, the defier of all laws, of all conventions. She remarks on the notion of free love and questions if love could be anything other, claiming it can dwell in no other atmosphere. Goldman understands that such a love is revolutionary because it remains elusive to capitalist and patriarchal control. Reflecting on the challenge presented by capitalism by such a love, she remarks how all the millions in the world have failed to buy love. She perceives a similar relationship between love and military oppression, noting how man has conquered whole nations, but all the power on earth has been unable to subdue love. She also provides a taste of the potentiality of love utilized as a dual power strategy, claiming that all the laws on the statutes, all the courts in the universe cannot tear it from the soil once love has taken root. So one reason for undertaking the research that led to the book was that although there's a growing body of literature exploring love as a political concept, very little work appeared to have been undertaken that attempted to link the experiences and practices of activists on the ground to the emerging theory. The research therefore located itself within a strong tradition of knowledge co-production between political activists and the academy. And a process of collective visioning was developed to serve as the central methodology for the research project. The approach itself was adapted from participatory methods used within the global Occupy movement as a tool for collaboration and collective action. And it involved a group process of intentionally generating a vision that was, on the one hand, utopian, while at the same time remaining firmly grounded in grassroots struggle. And it then prepared strategy for realizing the collective vision in the here and now. So in a nutshell, the approach utilizes utopia as process, and it uses imagination as a productive power in the pursuit of new knowledge and praxis. A diverse group of anti-capitalist, ecological, feminist and anti-racist activists from across 14 countries participated in the collective visioning process. While only a small number of activists participating in this collective visioning self-identified as anarchist with a capital A, the majority shared a common anarchist critique of contemporary governance and politics, and a commitment to anarchistic forms of organizing, such as autonomy from the state, horizontalism and direct democracy, direct action, the occupation of public space, a prefigurative politics, and the practice of mutual aid. The majority of participants described a radical solidarity, which they very much framed as love, which acts to provide a framework of plurality, providing a cohesive collective identity across the sometimes divisive array of ideologies, methodologies, identities, and cultural norms found within our movements and across society itself. Another very clear theme that shone throughout was the importance of repositioning love and the matrix of loving, caring relationships, which literally co-constitute society on a daily basis, as the central and primary social driver. Activists from both the global south and global north have discussed how in many cases indigenous knowledges have never forgotten this, and how this truth has been obscured in modern capitalist societies and replaced by what John Clark has described as a terrifying utopia of endless material progress based on a fundamental utopian fantasy of infinite powers of production and infinite possibilities for consumption. And a number of participants involved in some of the more recent dramatic social uprisings across the world described the revolutionary moment itself as being co-constituted by love, as a joyful and emotional experience in which previous divisions of class, gender, race, ideology, and religion fell away, at least temporarily, prefiguring the new society that they all wish to see. This prefiguration of a society which is at once communalistic and pluralistic, grounded in love, was a common theme throughout the collective visioning process. And so the key message that came out of the collective visioning was that a radical restructuring of society, consciously grounded in such loving, caring practices, is entirely conceivable and at least for us, very desirable. And as Landauer famously argued, the state can be understood as a social relationship, and therefore one that could be destroyed by creating new social relationships, by relating to one another differently. And it was in this way that Goldman too offered motherhood as a metaphor for the free society she envisioned, proposing that love, creation, and affective relations might co-constitute a non-dominating form of social control. Revolution and evolution have traditionally been considered as separate yet contingent parts of this slow march of progress, each leading to the other in a perpetual cycle of alternation. But the book questions such a perceived antinomy, and instead proposed and proposes revolution as it's formulated here as an alternative model for radical social change. As we have now positioned social reproduction as firmly grounded in loving, caring relations, we further argue that such relations offer a stream of continuation from the old society to the new, offering an opportunity to avert the usual post-revolutionary precarity in which the counter-revolution occurs and free society is repeatedly denied. And so rather than us ever arriving at a point of revolutionary closure, the activists involved in the collective visioning described a long-term, open-ended process of social change, grounded in a deep commons, in the entangled relations through which revolutionary love circulates and manifests. And importantly, for this presentation in particular, it's this emergence of a deeply relational, more than human ethics of solidarity and care that I've been calling the deep commons, that's become the focus of my research in recent years. And so this is what I'm going to try to touch on briefly for the remainder of this presentation, bringing some of the voices and ideas from those activists into a dialogue with classical and contemporary theory. So wish me luck. So this worldview, as expressed by these activists, aligns very closely with emerging work, or actually quite established work now in posthumanism, in which a number of scholars are starting to extend their thinking about ethics and affect to include non-humans, the environment, technology, and even matter itself, challenging the anthropocentric bias of contemporary political thought. So posthumanism positions the human subject as fully immersed in and immanent to a network of non-human relations. This emerging field calls for a love of the world, leading to an ethics of political cohabitation, grounded in a respect for and responsibility towards our more than human plurality. This approach reconceptualizes the self as embodied, embedded, relational, and extended. Ethics therefore shifts focus from finding the correct response to an externalized other to an obligation to be responsive to the other who is not entirely separate from what we call the self. So such an entangled empathy presents a robust relational ontology through which identity and agency are co-constituted by our social and material entanglements, with our individual subjectivities forming as an expression of these entanglements in multiple relations across time, space, and even species. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but put simply, we therefore care about others because they are fundamentally part of our own agency. So, of course, on the face of it, such a profound state of entanglement might present a terrifying prospect for many of us. Certain feminist debates, for instance, have taken a far more critical view of entangled relations for good reason, with the immanent nature of traditionally feminine labours serving as a prison that in turn withholds the possibility of transcendence and liberation. So from this perspective, the radically entangled nature of being that the posthumanities directs us towards could be seen as highly problematic. But perhaps counterintuitively, perhaps not, this research points to the fact that any free ecological society will only be realized through such immanence and not by somehow escaping it, transcending it. And it is at this point where the limitations of concept and language, at least for me, proved particularly challenging with regards to such states of contingent relationality. So Joel Covell, for instance, considered to be a founder of eco-socialism, spoke of the plasma of being, a state in which there is no real separation between things, only, in his words, one single, endlessly perturbed, endlessly becoming body. At the level of this plasma of being, there is therefore no differentiation between subject and object. And yet, paradoxically, as Covell points out, a being who was identical with all other beings would logically be no being at all. And resonating with this paradox, Timothy Morton's work on the mesh finds a similarly perplexing contradiction. Again, in their words, at the DNA level, the whole biosphere is highly permeable and boundaryless. And yet we have bodies with arms and legs and so on. And every day we see all kinds of life forms floating and scuttling around as if they were independent. And so anarcho-feminist philosopher Chiara Bottici argues that the very notion of a self-enclosed individual, a Cartesian ego, doesn't make any sense from this kind of perspective. We are rather, she concludes, processes and webs of affective and imaginal relations, which are never given once and for all. She develops a philosophy of trans-individuality, which outlines a form of somatic communism in which bodies come to exist only through other bodies, and again, in their words, a constant process of individuation that involves the inter and also the infra levels. But again, Bottici is also quick to point out that such a process does not mean abandoning individualities and distinctions. It rather involves conceiving every individuality as trans-individuality, as the result of a process of affecting and being affected that takes place at multiple levels. Her book, Anarcho-Feminism, that came out, I think, last year, is really great if you want to read more about that. And so for contemporary anarchist theorist Thomas Ibanez, liberatory power is, as a result, created within and emerges from the entirety of the social sphere because it is immanent to it. Consequently, any revolutionary social and ecological change must remain both anchored in and transformative of the here and now. So from an activist perspective, this invites us to reimagine our struggles in order to accommodate such post-unitary concepts of the human subject within this new entangled complexity. And while cultures of resistance against domination remain essential, this reframing of freedom as an inherent feature of the present moment presents us with the opportunity of building new cultures of affirmative politics, suffusing individual subjectivities through an entangled intersubjective matrix in the here and now. So for Tom, one of these activists, the struggle is about much more than merely changing people's minds. It is about bringing people into a common world and a common understanding, to have them, in his words, not just see it, but feel it. Entangling ourselves relationally in these deep commons, he argues, will allow us to develop a profound amount of affinity and caring, reaching out to a broader number of individuals and beings. Ultimately, argues Salma, another activist, we all come from the same source, and Alice similarly describes a collective unconscious or collective energy of loves, in her words, which becomes clearer through collective struggle. She articulates the importance of recognizing this shared commonality. In her words, and on the screen here, we all come from and return to the earth, so we can develop a love and care for that which we come from. And all other life on this planet similarly comes from and returns to the earth. So we can recognize our family, our connection with all other species in this respect. Consequently, Alice argues that a complete appreciation of all life as brethren, brothers and sisters can be discovered. Okay, so by thinking quite deeply about this radically more expansive sense of family as described by both these activists and an ever-growing number of theorists, it's become increasingly impossible to ignore what seems to me at least to be an enormous elephant in the room for a lot of this work, most of this work. And that is that at the same time as we might observe such revolutions in the way in which we perceive our place as humans within these deep commons, there very often remains a bizarre disconnect between the increasing calls for action to protect the environment and nature made by so many of us, and the daily terror, torture, murder, and dismemberment of non-human animals in order to satisfy humanity's desire to consume their flesh, albeit depersonalized and reimagined as meat. It's a fact that global capitalism has overseen the rapid spread of transnational industrial models of intensive animal agriculture. So in 2003, the United States became the first country to raise over 1 billion farmed animals in a single year. Today, 60 billion animals are killed on an annual basis for no other reason than to provide humans with meat and dairy products. And on this current trajectory, the figure could reach an astounding 120 billion by 2050. And you'll see the lobbyists at COP, the amount of lobbyists at the COP that's just rounding up now are pushing for at least that figure. And so one argument this book makes is that as long as this mass murder of non-human animals for our flesh consumption persists, and as long as it remains shrouded in denial, even within the most self-declared of radical circles, then any talk of environmental protection, love of the world, deep commons, or even free society will remain self-delusory contradictions, like a perverse nonsense. And so how might such a profound level of cognitive dissonance be challenged and overcome, especially when the vast majority of us still seem wedded to human-centered and human-defined concepts of the political? For one of the activists, Dembe, who's I think is here, it will involve first and foremost the recognition that we are all sentient beings. It will involve being concerned, being empathetic, and considering conditions from the perspective of the other, human and non-human. And another activist, Alice, laments how we have elevated ourselves above the other species and placed ourselves apart. For her, this kind of relating has become, in her words, increasingly ridiculous. And so it's time for us to undo this unconscious hierarchy we are operating within. And like Maria suggests, that we need to move into a level where we are not always looking through the lens of my own superiority as a human, where I experience myself as an animal, as part of this lively, moving system. But such a transition won't be an easy task. The belief in a human nature separate from a non-human nature has been central in the construction of political theory and practice since the Enlightenment. And unfortunately, while social constructivism has been successful in explaining how social inequality is man-made and socially constructed, it's also led to the understandable conclusion that there's a clear binary opposition between nature and culture, or the ground and the constructed. It's also led to the so for eco-activist Jack, this profound separation has led to, and again, this is in his words, an awful relationship with nature. It's us and that which we call nature. And he says we have to revision that and give ourselves a different story and narrative as human beings. He argues that a reframing of our position within nature will produce a transformative effect, how we act, what we do, the choices we make, and therefore changing this story of inside-outside nature for him is paramount. Importantly, as Richard White and Hannah Gunderman have pointed out, human indifference, neglect, and violence towards our more than human family is in no way natural or intrinsic to the human condition. Rather, and crucially, such anthroprivilege, as they call it, is a learned behavior. And this is vitally important because, in their words, it allows a vista of hope and a new possibilities to emerge. If this is learned behavior, then we can still unlearn, re-educate, and liberate ourselves in progressive ways. And so I think it's fair to say that we're currently witnessing a paradigm shift, scientifically led, in which commonly held core beliefs about the separation of humans and nature are being displaced in favor of a non-dualistic understanding of becoming, a nature-culture continuum in which what is engendered and that which is engendering are ultimately inseparable. And so the current version of reality that so many political realists assert authority over, in my department, not least, will need to be reconsidered and learned anew, and quickly. Of course, for such a sense of radical community to be extended in any real way, forms of practice that reflect this will have to be established. Another activist, Rosie, described how she facilitates nature connection work with activists in order to produce a sense of connection with, in her words, that which is bigger than us, while at the same time entwined with and part of us. The feeling of interdependence most activists experience as a result, she claims, becomes an important motivation for their activism. And the recognition of their place in nature produces a newfound humility. So again, in her words, it's another way of looking, another way of seeing the world, a different lens for how you might relate to the world. Our current society makes us see the world in a particular way, like we are separate from it, we're above it, we control it. And these exercises show us it's not like that. We are part of it and subject to it. We are part of these systems. We are embedded in them. What is really encouraging, for me anyway, is that there is now a remarkably interdisciplinary and intersectoral body of activists and scholars who are thinking and organising in this way. In October last year, for instance, our politics department at University College Cork, along with La Terre Institute for Community and Ecology in the US, that's headed up by John Clark, and I'd recommend you to Google that if you're interested. They do some great work there. We co-hosted the first Deep Commons International Conference. And aside from a very diverse range of social and ecological activists from around the world, I think it's worth mentioning the similarly diverse backgrounds of the scholars who participated. So I think I've got time. Half an hour. So I'm almost done. So I'm going to read just some of them because I think it's important. So they included the environmental humanities, ecofeminism, sociology, political theory, political ecology, philosophy, the fine arts, music studies, cultural studies, development studies. I'm going to keep going. Social psychology, environmental studies, anthropology, history, economics, social ecology. It goes on. Critical animal studies, geography, indigenous studies, and there's more. I'm going to stop. And for me, anyway, it's really encouraging. It was a really it was largely people on the edges of their departments, but once we all got together, it was something else. It was really encouraging and nurturing, probably is the word. And so to conclude, and as I'm sure everyone here is already aware, the scientific evidence couldn't be clearer. We're in a state of planetary emergency, posing an existential threat to civilization. And I would argue that to stand any chance of averting imminent anthropocentric ecocide, it's going to be essential for scholars to explore radically new ways of working in collaboration with many different sectors to drive the innovative solutions that we so desperately need. And so it's my proposal, and of course that of the book, that the radical, more than human entanglements that I've just been discussing might therefore serve as the basis for a co-emergent relational ethics of solidarity and care, a deep commons, in which these solutions might be nurtured and sustained. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for listening. So I'm ending with this quote from Reclus for no other reason really that I think it's really beautiful. It's just a great quote, kind of sums up some of the sentiment that I was trying to get across. And for anyone who might be interested in engaging with this idea of the deep commons further, there's a link here to the project website, which also has a series of video interviews exploring this theme and lots of recordings, loads of recordings from last year's conference that I just mentioned. And there's also a link here for downloading an open access version of Love and Revolution, the book. So if anyone's interested, If I haven't completely put you off finding out more, then there's a copy of the book to download there. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it, and I'll stop sharing. I think that's it. Yep.
Cool. Thank you for that. Sorry for having to go off for a bit to deal with a few things. So I have things to ask, but I'm going to hold off because that's a good, polite thing to do. And see what other folks might want to chat about. In part because I suspect if I ask what I'm thinking of, I'll probably end up asking you the same questions I asked you a few months ago.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll ramble on for hours.
Do we have any thoughts or questions from Matt or
I mean, I have some, I'm processing.
yeah.
But I have some questions I'd like to ask. That are not, I want to start by saying that I found that very interesting. I kind of think about these things in a slightly different perspective, from a slightly different kind of philosophical trajectory, I guess I would say, from postcolonial studies and from Deleuzean studies too, actually, specifically. Yeah. So a lot of it made a lot of sense to me, and I completely agree with the kind of the aims and the intentions. So you can guess what's coming. There must be a bug there, right? It's not really.
No, this is really good. This is why we both do and don't want to do these things.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really not about it's really not about it. I was thinking through that myself, my own, you know, how we come to similar aims and questions from very different directions, and then of course along the way there's some kind of friction between those, and what do we do with that? And so I'm thinking about so I've taught for many years postcolonial literature, and environmental humanities and critical animal studies has often come up in the classroom.
Yeah.
And at the same time, for example, that students who are very committed to these things, who are themselves racialized and minoritized, would say to me, and it's a difficult question to answer back, okay, but you know, people don't treat me as fully human yet. So what does it mean for me to be asked to take on the task of being in kinship with animals, when, for example, my status is already so close to that sometimes, in some instances, right? So of course there is anthro-privilege, and of course racialization doesn't work continuously like that. But I'm just curious, what, you know, how do you think, how did the activists that you talked to think about that? Because obviously there's a diverse set of people you interviewed there, and how do they think through that?
Yeah. So first, just to say, clearly someone in my body doesn't have the, you know, I'm not suggesting that everyone has to, you know, you have to do this, you have to. I'm engaging in an inquiry, and I invite people to come along and with me. So the activists I spoke with were from across the world. The truth is that a lot of the group that I started the process with, you can imagine if I started saying, I want to do research about love as a political concept, it attracts a certain type of person, and then the kind of the snowballing from that continues. We kept it very open. I kept on reaching out, but there's certainly a certain type of person with a certain worldview who would be attracted enough to participate in the depth that we ended up participating in. So, yeah, it didn't come up. I've read a lot of literature and critique about this, which is very valid. A lot of the quotes that I just used then, I'm just trying to think who I used there. At least half of them are from people who themselves would be, well, the majority of them are from people who would be experiencing discrimination. About half of them are from people who would be just really experiencing multiple forms of discrimination. And so what I'm saying is, this is probably quite a biased group to begin with, because what they were already, this didn't come up as an issue. This, what your critique there wasn't really brought up as a challenge. But I see it as a challenge, and I've had other conversations, and quite rightly I've been brought to task as I see. For me, this was I actually became a vegan through the course of this particular research project. I started talking to people, and that's why it's only an aspect of the book, but as I started doing the research, I kept on coming up against people who were talking about their experience of veganism and bringing up, you're talking about this interrelationality. What about this? And I was transformed personally by it, and I met a number of other people through this particular collective visioning process from a very wide, diverse group of backgrounds and positionalities who had also at some point been quite transformed by coming into contact with other people. And that's why I've decided, as much as I can, to drop it into things when I something that really helped me, and I'm scrabbling around here trying to get the name, but I can try and get it in a minute if you want, if you're interested. They wrote, there's a scholar who's a vegan scholar, and also an Indigenous Canadian, and they have talked about this kind of Orientalism that can exist in the academy, and is often used by people who might want to just discount vegan arguments or anything. That it's coming from a place of privilege, and it's a largely kind of European white kind of area, and so I found it very helpful that they were able to engage with this, and their argument was that their Indigenous identity was a process, was a work in progress, a constant evolution, and actually what happens is that people in bodies like mine in the academy have freeze-framed this idea of what it is to be Indigenous, an Indigenous person, what Indigenous culture is, and how dare we? And actually, as there are many Indigenous women in her particular community who choose as part to use some of the Indigenous culture and traditions to actually support their veganism, and they're continuing to write this story as they go forward. And how dare we try to freeze frame them in the past? So it's tricky, it's complex. That's I don't know if that's it's a response. I don't know if it's an answer, but there you go.
I appreciate.
Does that speak to what you're saying, or yeah, that's.
Some of it, yeah, and I
Yeah.
appreciate that it's complicated, because I think it's true, as you said, that the people who tend to have already an interest in thinking through kind of revolutionary love are already, will already have ways of thinking through how that connects with the ideas and the practices that they've come from, and I'm no different than that. I mean, I also, as I said, it's not that I disagree with anything.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if you've read Leela Gandhi's work. I'm gonna do the next one of these seminars at the beginning of next term.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be talking about her work on affective communities, because one of the chapters in her book, Affective Communities, is all about how at the turn of the century, actually no, at the beginning of the 19th century, it was precisely anti-vivisectionists and people who were starting to talk about our connection with animals in the West who drove anti-imperialism. And so that there always has been a very close link between those things, and a very deep link. And so then it's very, like, it doesn't really matter where you're doing that work from. It's important that it's done so that we get there. So yeah, no, I think that's absolutely a response. And yet I don't know, there's something at the same time that's still left over for me, and I have to think about what that is. It's certainly not that we can't come together and be an affective community around these questions. I guess that the question I always have in the back of my mind is, in terms of the politics of knowledge production, for example, or other things, how do we address the residual inequality in that? Which I think is, sorry, I'm talking at great length here.
No, it's good.
Okay. I supervised a thesis on whales and how we have tended to sort of critical animal studies work, and how we've tended to think about whales as other and animal and less than us. And of course, we hunt them and we use them in all kinds of ways. But at one point, I had said this very thing to the student, that, have you ever thought about the fact that some humans still don't feel themselves to be fully human, and what that how that has consequences? And everybody in the room sort of looked at me like, oh yeah, yeah. And then we just sort of moved on, and we never talked about it again. And so there's something left over. That's the best I can do. I don't know. There's something left over, and I'm not sure how to articulate it. And I certainly don't want to attack anything you said, because I see where you're going, and I see how this works, and I think it's the way.
No, in my area, so the anarchists of the 19th century, early 20th century, were also very, very, very aware that you all of these struggles interconnect. That there's no freedom for one without the all. And that's kind of followed through. The kind of total liberation movement now is it's a follow-on from centuries of struggle and activism, and that's simply dropping in the more than human into what we might call the what's often called the kind of intersectional struggle. So it's just dropping one more. Simon Springer, I don't know if you've come across Simon Springer. He's so provocative and he's so brilliant that and he makes this, he makes, and I won't do him justice, but he makes this case of, like there was a point where, we might have had these conversations around white supremacy. We might have had these conversations around women's liberation, and all these other struggles. And we're just starting to have this conversation now, and it's all and I guess from my perspective, it's difficult. All I can do is have the conversation. The reason I feel there's only a certain way that I can travel with this conversation, with the positionality that I have. Otherwise, I start to talk for others, and that's just not okay. So what with the collective visioning, what I've tried to do is let those voices come through, and they really did come through, you know, and it has to be a collective process, and it has to be a collective conversation, and I'm part of that conversation, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer for you to that question, you know.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
Thanks, man.
No worries.
If I could awkwardly jump in on that for a second. This morning I was listening to, I don't know if you know the band Dead Prez for the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Early 2000 hip hop, but made by vegan dudes. But the interesting thing about it is the way that they frame that isn't like animals are getting killed that make me sad, but it's like, well, why in Black communities in America is the food system giving us crap? Why are the stores so expensive? So they frame the relationship to food through a lens of inequality and uneven geography of access. So it becomes a much different kind of way of talking about their veganism, or it becomes about like, we want to be a healthy as individuals and a community, but our food system is killing us. Why is it killing us? And it's linked to all these other things.
Just to say, just following on from that, Richard White has written a really good article. Can't remember what it's called, but it's where he traces the meat industry and who is likely to work in that industry and the harm that it causes those people. And of course, they're predominantly very, you know, the working class is often immigrants. It's often, you know, in whichever country it is, it's women, it's immigrants, and he very, very deftly kind of pulls the whole thing together that you're just describing there, that this whole system of oppression across, you know, multi-species and also kind of intersectional, you know. So he does that really well. He's called Richard White. He's a great guy. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something. And I want to think a little bit about method. And usually I don't want to think about method because a lot of times the way method gets talked about in business schools is it's almost like you're the police and it's like your warrant. Like, you know, why should we listen to you? Show me your papers, then maybe you can go in and maybe we can listen to you. But what I really love about your book is the way you describe about collective visioning and working together with people. Method isn't a warrant. It's not a sort of justification. It's something more broader about how you actually do a kind of politics and think together. Which is to me seems applicable even outside of this particular project. It's almost like, you know, and one thing that I'm curious about is when we talk about method, it always seems to be about like the justification for a particular empirical method. So rather than like, what is the method for actually thinking or thinking together or thinking creatively or differently? So method not as a procedural question, but as a sort of actually substantial question about like, but what do we actually want to do?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. The method, the process is prefigurative, isn't it? So the tools you use to the tools you use are going to affect the outcome. It's just the way it is. So for me, I'm relatively new to academia. It might be obvious, might not, I don't know. but I spent a lot of time working in the community and voluntary sector, taking a community development approach to various different kind of community projects, and so it was very natural. I've been involved in various forms of activism for and on and off throughout my life as well, and so working together and finding ways to kind of fairly and justly have a co-creation of whatever it is you're looking for seems, was always there. It seemed very obvious to me. So as I started to develop, for my PhD, for instance, when I thought, what methods am I going to use? I was lucky that I had a really cool supervisor. Do you know Lawrence Davis? You must know Lawrence. Yeah. So he was like, yeah, whatever you want to do, and he was able to, of course, rein me in enough that I could get a PhD. But so collective visioning, which I call collective visioning, is exactly that. It's not a means to an end. It's not a way of finding something out necessarily, or proving a hypothesis. It's a process which aims to bring together people around a theme, to, in a very real way, co-imagine and from my perspective, what I've used it for is to co-theorize. To some extent, the elephant in the room is there's me pulling it all together and then doing the writing. It's just a given. It's not a truly collective visioning process. But out of that process, I know that I've engaged in research in the past using those kind of techniques. So I've engaged in some research, trying to with a research question. I've answered that question to some degree. I've written a paper, blah, blah, blah. It's all kind of neatly folded up, done, and that's to one side, and it's on my CV, and that's kind of there. The collective visioning process, we still, the people in this particular one that ended up forming a lot of the theory in the book, I still talk with most of the people that we were really engaged with, the core group of the people. We're still thinking through the same things that we were talking about then. It didn't end, it didn't stop. And all of us have been transformed to greater or lesser degrees by that process. And it's influenced the way we, our practice, our work, our research, in a very real way. And from it, the conference or the gathering, the continuing relationality, the conference that we had last year, that kind of flowed out of the process. And again, it was very much, we had a great facilitator who was like very skilled in open space dialogues, and it was a different kind of conference. And from that, there's now a research network, and so there's just this massive difference between viewing a methodology as we call it methodology, but using a process as opposed to a standardized set of measuring, measurement tools or whatever. I'm rambling now, but yeah, I feel strongly about it. I'm really interested in it.
No, I mean, I find that super interesting, because I remember one of the most amusing things I ever got on a grant rejection was I was told, it is not certain what this research will find. And I was like, that's kind of the point. Like, if you already knew what you were going to find, why would you have any process of doing anything? You already know the end.
I have exactly the same problem. I've actually had people say to me, have you considered doing something completely different? So that you can get funded? And the answer is yes. In the early hours of the morning, in the dark, I've gone, yes, something completely different. Sorry, go on.
Can I ask a question back then to you, Stephen, about the way that this seminar is organized? Like thinking that this seminar is a series is about the commons. Is there something ideally you'd like to do with the format of it that would kind of, that would kind of build on what Matt just said, that because and I get it for obvious reasons. We have a seminar, it's scheduled, somebody comes in and speaks and we listen and it's all that, Is there something that you would like to do that with the format that would work us more towards the process of the commons?
I think that would be an interesting thing to do. I'm not sure actually what it would be per se, but I think that would be, I mean, one of the sort of longer term goals. I mean, one of the things that I've been sort of working on myself was there's this guy, part of the situation back in the mid-60s, Alexander Trocki, who tried to put together this sort of research publishing project called Sigma, where rather than being book as fixed object, it was an ongoing portfolio of stuff. So I think it'd be an interesting way in which a publication becomes not a fixed thing, but becomes an ongoing, unfolding iterative process. Now, how that would work in terms of a seminar format, I'm not exactly sure yet, but yeah, I think that is something to definitely consider it and work on. I think basically when we were starting last year, it was almost like, kind of like Field of Dreams style, to like build it first and then work on that as things develop. But yeah, definitely.
It's tricky. I think that if you were interested, Stephen, I think the Anarchist Studies Network in the UK have been trying out different formats and modes to make things more kind of participatory and stuff. But again, it's tricky. Most of us just end up, and me included, we're familiar with these formats and they do work, they do serve a function, and they're time-wise and all of that. But if you were interested, you might reach out to those guys. Lawrence, who I just mentioned, he's still there on the organizing committee there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think even that switch in the question from Stephen asked a question about method and you moved your way towards process. I like that. I think even that movement from method to process was, I don't know, that I found that helpful actually. Like, yeah, maybe we don't need to talk about methods. Maybe we need to talk about processes for building other kinds of social relations with our work, with knowledge production.
I mean, one of the things that is interesting, and I don't want to make this too Essex internal, is that most of our research centers are basically not so much research centers, but they're almost like teaching groups, which are translated into research groups, right? So you have the OHRM corresponds to this research center. So it becomes more or less a way through which the academic teaching group replicates itself at the level of thinking. The difference here is that we're both across the university and also bring lots of people outside of it. So it's almost like a different level of process, because we're not trying to sort of constantly sort of like bring together the group, because the group is indefinite. So it would require a different sort of thinking about process, because it's a more open ecosystem. Anyways, sorry, enough of me talking. I'm sorry. I'm
Ying-Tin, may I ask a question?
Of course you can.
Yeah, sorry. First of all, so sorry for coming in late and only caught the end of it. I'm in Malaysia, so I just got the time wrong completely. So sorry, but it's but the bit that I caught in the Q&A, the discussion is fascinating to me. So I thought, and got me thinking. So I wonder if I can just join the conversation. And I predict, and it's Rinalini. We met before, right? I think we're teaching the same course. The question about so if we still are dealing with inequality among humans, how do we talk about sort of equal relationship with animals? Is that the question that, I guess that's probably the gist of the idea. And because I do research about inequality, digital inequality as well, I find it a very important question. And this reminds me of the post-humanist conference, a workshop on post-humanism that I attended before. And a core concept that I got from the limited, the little I know from post-humanism is this process of objectification and subjectification. And so I wonder, I mean, whether looking into the process of objectification, I mean, when we say some humans are treated almost not as fully human, it's because we often treat humans as objects. So there's this instrumentalization of humans. And so this vision of treating animals or all sentient beings as equal could be a process of anti-objectification. So respecting the subjectivity of all beings, could that be then seen as something that's universal, and this thinking could then be used to challenge the inequality among humans, within, so if we are, could this be like a unifying theme, a concept, right? So what we're talking about is if all beings are equal, then why are we objectifying? I mean, the reason animals or the way we treat nature or other life forms so terribly is because they are just objects, right? So they are just resources almost, right? As in our process of modernization. And humans is the same, right? Like we are turning into labor forces or whatever, right? Capital. So perhaps, is this what you're talking about when you say rehumanization? Is this
Are you talking
part of the idea? Yeah, Matt. Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't use rehumanization, but what you're saying there. So in this research and in the book, it's exactly what you're saying. Actually, what I claim is, and what we found through a lot of discussion and dialogue was that what we ended up calling revolutionary love which is this profound sense of affinity and connection, which you feel often from our perspective as activists, you feel in those moments where something's really changing, something's really shifting, and there's a sense. And I spoke to people who were part of the Syrian revolution who just spoke of tears running down their face as all the divisions dropped away, and so I wanted to know what is this, what's going on, and what makes revolutionary love, what I'm calling revolutionary love, different from other aspects of love we might be more familiar with. Is my claim is that it's a post-egoic embodied experience of this kind of profound interpenetration almost that the post-humanities point towards. So usually, a lot of Marxist philosophers, a lot of Marxist political theorists throughout the 20th century and still now use eros as to describe that movement towards the revolution and revolutionary change and all of this. So they call it eros, and that's really important, but that form of desire, or that form of love, as I frame it in the book, is very much involves a separation. So it involves I as an individual desiring something out, and that might be a free society, it might be equal rights for all beings, it might be a world in which a free ecological society where we've achieved all of these things, but that desire is ego-driven, and usually what happens with that desire is we end up holding on too tight. If we think of it in individual relations rather than the vast relations we're talking about, most of us know, we've experienced at some time on one end or the other, that when you hold too tight, when you desire another person too much, it just causes, there's domination, and there's pain involved, there's damage done in some way. So what was special and unique about what I'm calling revolutionary love is it doesn't involve this conceptual, this split. So it's post-egoic. It's an embodied experience that you feel when the sense of separation falls away.
Sorry, but this sounds incredibly like Buddhism. You're just talking about dropping of the self.
Okay, so
that's another question I wanted to ask. Yeah,
so
it's
true. So me as an individual, I spent years hanging around in meditation centers and monasteries and stuff like that. So it's had an effect on me. You know, I was, when I arrived in the academy, there were certain areas that I was naturally attracted to.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm actually also exploring how Buddhism, reading a book on Buddhism and information technology.
Oh, yeah.
So this drawing upon Buddhist philosophy or other kind of philosophical traditions in changing the way we see the world, I think it is highly valuable. So
and interestingly,
I love the way you put it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly, there are examples around the world, all around the world, of societies who actually already inhabit this, structure their communities and organize their societies in this way. Like the Zapatistas, which are quite famous at the moment, the Zapatista revolution. There was a load of Marxist vanguardists who went in to try to, to teach the locals how, about politics and how to rise up. And what happened was a remarkable kind of turnaround where these revolutionaries were actually transformed by the indigenous knowledge that they came across.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tzotzil community, which is the community where the Zapatista revolution has taken place, they have these concepts which is the collective heart, they call it the collective heart, and Chulel, which is this kind of radical interconnected, this interconnectivity that we're talking about. And they've actually, when they greet each other, they talk about, what is the state of your heart, and when the organizational structures, which lots of anarchist-inspired people around the world have been in awe looking at, are very much grounded in this ancient way of this cosmovision of seeing the world, so I think a lot of the answers are already there, and it's almost a rediscovering of them and finding ways to bring them back into the overall discussion as we move forward. Sorry, go on.
Can I ask another question? Maybe it's method, maybe it's not. It's this common visioning. Is that the term?
Yeah, collective
visioning.
But you can call it, yeah. Sorry.
Collective visioning, yeah. And so does it mean that you sort of is this co-visioning that is inclusive of all different forms of beings, right? Is that what I mean? So inviting all parties to be.
No, well, that would be great. The collective visioning process was in this particular case, it was a group of activists from around the world and I facilitated a process where we continually came together and worked through worked
Okay.
around the themes.
Okay.
But we also brought in we did visioning exercises, and it was
Right,
a
right.
co-imagining. But interestingly, one of the women who joined us, when we did one of our visioning exercises, she kind of had a bit of a profound experience for her. She was shaken by it, and she had exactly what you're talking about. She had this image of a collective visioning, like a council of being, and she there was a badger there, and there was all these different animals, and so that happened as part of the process, which you don't usually get
Interesting.
in
But yeah, that's what I
focus group.
what I wanted to ask, because if we're talking about envisioning a future, I guess from where you are coming from, you are talking about a future that is inclusive, and with all beings having a place in it, right? And a more equal relationships, right? Or interconnectivity.
Sure. Yeah.
So then the question is, who speaks for them?
No, exactly. So
what is the agency of the animals, the nature, the ecology? Are we still speaking on behalf of them, or how do we actually include them in this collective visioning process?
Yeah. So the collective visioning process that I've been working on is very much with humans, and in a way, how would I put it? Rather than seeing a need to bring the more than human community that we're part of, they're getting along with things absolutely fine. There's no problem from their side. It's more that we need to find ways of damage control. So the collective visioning that I'm involved in is a process with humans. I've read, I've seen that there's a lot of that there's theoretical and philosophical work around how we bring the more than human into political processes and things like that, and I think that's valuable, but often it's theoretical rather than practical, and a lot of my focus is on practically how do we do it, and the collective visioning process that I use is part of that. It's a means to an it's a part of working through and asking that question, how do we do it, and a way to involve as many a diversity of voices in that as to what the answer might be. So I'm not going to claim that I've found a way to include all beings in a creation of theory.
No, but at least conceptually, I guess that's what we're trying to do, right? If we are talking about a more
absolutely
future, a more inclusive future.
Yeah. So I think from a human perspective, to the opportunity to really find ourselves within nature. So we're usually with nature, we're alongside nature. The commons is often seen as a set of resources to be managed, or at best, it's often a set of ecosystems for us to protect. And there's always that separation. And I think what areas like the post-humanities, what revisiting and learning from indigenous knowledges that never went away, what these things can offer us is a way to settle back into that. So from my perspective, where we start ontologically dictates where we end up politically, and how we formulate our responses to the polycrises that we're trying to deal with. So if we're mistaken at that level, the rest, our responses will always have a anthropocentric bias. They just, so if we don't get it right there, everything else we get wrong. And I think that's clear from the past couple hundred years of what we've been doing, you know. So the good news is a lot of what we do is fine, and there's a lot. We've done some amazing things as a human society, but if we can find a way to rediscover our place within, not alongside or with, or you know, but you know, really within nature, as part of nature, and knowing that the cosmovisions that I engaged with around the world, communities that have that sense, have that cosmovision as the bases of their community, their society, they create on large free ecological societies. There's all sorts of other problems, you know, and that's, you know, but ecologically speaking, they create ecological societies, and I think if we can relearn that and pop it in at the ontological level, then our kind of scientific responses, the way we organize society, and all of the other ways we dominate each other, human and non-human, even between ourselves, would be transformed if we can get it right at that point. So I guess that's what my argument, my basic argument would be. Yeah.
Right. I wonder if you're familiar with Bruno Latour's work. Latour, the French philosopher. Latour, and especially in his later work. I mean, from the beginning, he talks about the agency of non-human, right? Recognizing the non-human agency, so actants rather than actors, right? So everything actually has agency. So recognizing the agency of the non-human, and I think his later work sort of moved to much more towards its relational ontology and environmentalism.
And he talks about returning to the earth, becoming not earthlings, but becoming terrestrials once more. He says we should become terrestrials once more. So I think that's what the deep
terrestrial, exactly.
So that's what the deep commons is about. We have to rediscover. We're mistaken. We're mistaken in our image of what we are and also how we are in the world. And if we can rectify that mistake, everything else, I would argue, might follow. You know. Yeah.
Ariana?
Yes, thanks so much for a wonderful book and presentation, for the great discussion. I think my question, and it's half formed. It was very much sparked by the discussion today. So my question is about the relationship between this process of collective visioning that we've been talking about, and I'm much clearer now than than an initial impression, and the co-constitution of a revolutionary moment. So thinking of different groups that I've been involved with, from maybe anarchist groups, the kinds involved in the setting up and keeping going of social centers, that maybe I can, in a way, those communities, I think, lend themselves to the possibilities for engaging in the processes you've been discussing. I can see that happening in terms of the kind of relations and openness and commitment to prefiguration that exists there, despite the difficulties of activism and keeping groups going. But then when I think of maybe, so I'm also involved in disability politics, and when I think of disabled people groups, maybe I can get, we have something called access intimacy, which is getting each other's needs. So it's very profound, and that for me was another way of thinking about that co-constitution of moments that can if we think of revolution as also happening at the everyday level, which for disabled people is quite key. I was trying to translate that into, I'm very sorry, how that could be translated. But my question would be for you, then, is what you have encountered, both in terms of the revolutionary love that you've been talking about, in terms of the collective visioning that you've been engaged in and facilitating, do you think, yeah, I was wondering if you could say more about the groups that or revolutionary, yeah, the revolutionary communities or groups that using that kind of love that you are talking about, and those processes of collective visioning are most, in inverted commas, but most suitable for. And the reason why I'm asking that is because, and this is how the conversation today connects very much, thinking about multi-species justice, for example, in some groups that maybe they weren't groups, maybe they were just groups I had encountered in meetings or gatherings. But at times there is that sense, as has been mentioned today, of groups saying we are struggling with our own inequalities. We cannot even think of other species, so multi-species justice, even climate change. We have other issues to focus on. Yes, so that kind of barrier. I was wondering, yes, so that's what I'm asking is are groups that can experience this revolutionary love, or that can engage also through facilitation in collective visioning for futures of non-domination and multi-species justice at that level. To what extent? So basically, I think I'm asking: are these groups already constituted along specific lines? In the sense, for example, anarchist communities already with some awareness of how multi-species justice really belongs fundamentally within anarchist praxis, something we need, or we can, and yeah, or we don't need to necessarily start from that level of awareness or composition of the groups that are going to participate or that have experienced revolutionary love. So basically, yeah, I'm asking about whether there is some kind of pre-constituted form of the groups suitable for these experiences. I know it sounds bad, but I hope you can understand what I'm trying to get at, which is basically about, yeah, whether there is some kind of constitution of the groups that makes these forms of love or processes of collective visioning more or less possible. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. The book's actually published with the Contemporary Anarchist series. So that's definitely that's the area, the kind of the way, the direction I've come from. I think like Alex Pritchard and Ruth Kinner and Thomas Swan, they've just they did some really interesting research a couple years ago that's just come out as a book, I think, around anarchist constitutionalizing, which sounds like it sounds like it sounds like an impossible kind of thing to put together, but these groups do organize in a certain way, as you said, and I think there is a process, and I think if you look over the decades, I think we're all evolving in the way that we kind of organize together and formulate groups. So there was a German activist who was more kind of my age, who was involved in this particular collective visioning, and she spoke of being being involved in an anarchist group, like in her early 20s, and this was a couple of decades ago in Germany, and how harsh and aggressive and difficult it was for her to be part of, and then she had to leave. And she commented, and this got lots of other people saying the same kind of thing, that the fact that we've kept revisiting, we've kept on pushing for freedom in all these different areas. It's like having another friend of mine said, it's like having a jelly. I don't know if this translates outside of, I'm from England, and we have this thing called a jelly, which is this like a blancmange thing that just kind of wobbles on a plate. And if you push a jelly anywhere, the whole thing wobbles. That's the analogy that they were making. And I think if we work to if we confront injustice and domination in any area, the whole jelly wobbles. We're slowly pushing the boundaries, and that's why total liberation isn't extreme. It's a realization that none are free until all are free. So what I noted this in the book, and I mentioned this earlier, that the people who were naturally attracted to this process, especially because I'd very clearly said that I was looking at love as a political concept and how it affects our organizing. There was a certain type of person attracted to this, to engaging in this process. And the process went incredibly well, and it was respectful, and it was beautiful, and it led to almost like an affinity group forming, which I said we're still in contact now. And then we noted that compared to experiences, and probably a very common, very common experience, where there's a lot of argument, a lot of ego in groups, a lot of disagreement, and which often lead to a group just dissolving, just blowing itself apart. So what we found were that instilling processes of organizing with this sense of revolutionary love, grounding ourselves in the deep commons, knowing that we're connected, that we're really grounding ourselves in that, at that starting point, as a starting point for organizing, quite clearly affected the way that the results, we worked together really beautifully. It worked really well, and we were able to compare it with other activist groups, other attempts at organizing that we've been involved with, that had blown themselves apart because these sentiments, this kind of ontological basis wasn't there. So I think, yes, definitely grounding ourselves in what I'm calling the deep commons. Other people call it all sorts of other stuff. If we talk about prefiguration, we really, I would argue that we need to go right the way back to ontology. If we're talking about prefiguration, we need to take it all the way back to ontology. I can hear the door. I'm going to have to open my door. Just give me 1 minute, because someone's knocking, and it's probably my... Sorry, my school decided to give my youngest kid the day off. They only told us 2 weeks ago, and so me and my partner are just taking turns. That was them. I'd locked them out. Sorry. Anyway, I'll stop there. I don't know if that Ariana, did that speak to what you were asking, or?
Yes, totally. Thanks so much. Yes.
Oh yeah, great. Okay. Sorry for running off. I just had to.
Well, if there's no more questions, then we can probably call it a day and go have lunch or something similar to that effect. I know I have had lunch yet, so I'm looking forward to it. But thank you for that, Matt, and thank you to everyone for the interesting conversation. That was really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. I really enjoyed this discussion as well, and I've downloaded your book.
Oh, brilliant.
And I'm going to check it out and to sort of get to know more about your work and perhaps reach out to you at some point, because I really would like to explore these topics more. I myself, I'm a Buddhist and a meditator as well. So a lot of what you said really resonates with me. And I've been thinking how those philosophy and the sort of embodied experience can be sort of channeled into our academic research. And I think you've set very good examples, sort of, showing possibilities of how we do that. And I really appreciate it. And I really love to have further conversations with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Where's the okay, cool.